They told me my father died in a fire when I was 2. For 25 years that lie sat between my mother and me like a locked door. Then a routine thing, donating blood at a grocery parking lot, unlocked a chain of small, improbable events that tore that door off its hinges. What I found on the other side was a man everyone had written off as dead, a mother who'd kept a secret to protect me, and a reason for silence that changed the story of my life. This is the truth I finally walked into, and it will not be tidy. If this story moves you, please like and share, and keep reading. Your support helps real stories reach the people who need them. I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona. My name is Lucas Marlowe, and for as long as I could remember my life was shaped by a blank space, a missing name, a missing face. My mother, Elena Marlowe, worked nights as a CNA at a memory care facility and kept the apartment tidy and steady, but she never spoke of the man who had fathered me. When I was 2, she told me, the man had died in a fire. That was the end of the story. No photos. No stories at the dinner table. No letters tucked in drawers. The memory of him was a silence she carried like a wound she didn't want reopened. Growing up, that absence felt like a defect rather than a protection. Other kids boasted about fishing trips and camping with their dads. They had voices to argue with, to imitate, to blame for scraped knees and half-remembered jokes. I had only the flat line of a sentence, he died. It shaped my sense of who I was, incomplete, patched together, missing half the map. I learned to avoid asking Elena about him because the way her hands paused over the dish towel, or her eyes flickered toward the closed bedroom door when the topic drifted close, told me questions landed like stepping on glass. By 27 I had built a life that looked ordinary. I was a mechanic at a small shop on the east side, good with my hands and precise with the engines I coaxed back to life. Machines made sense, parts fit, systems followed rules, the world obeyed logic. People didn't. Love and family were messy, inconsistent forces that had hurt me by omission. Still, Elena and I existed in a small, warm routine. She made my birthdays special even when money was tight. She read my report cards and pretended not to notice when I ate the last of the cheap frozen dinners so she'd have enough for 2 meals. I loved her without reservation, but that love lived beside suspicion. The day that changed everything was ordinary and stubbornly small. I parked at the grocery store to grab a pack of filters and noticed a red and white mobile donation bus with volunteers handing out flyers. I'd never given blood before. Maybe it was guilt, maybe a desire to do something simple and unremarkable, but I stepped inside, signed the paperwork, and sat in the vinyl chair. The nurse joked, told me to squeeze the ball, and slid the band off my arm when it was done. I left with a sticker that said I'd done my good deed for the day and forgot about it. A week later, while I was under the hood of a 2007 Tacoma, my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. The voice on the line was crisp and professional. "Mr. Marlowe, this is Dr. Singh calling from the Desert Valley Blood Center. Your donation flagged an anomaly. We recommend you come in for follow-up." My throat tightened. Anomaly meant tests, tests meant explanations I didn't want. He hesitated then added, "I can't explain over the phone, but we have reason to think the anomaly relates to family history. If you're willing, come to this address in Seattle." He read a street and number I'd never seen before. Seattle. I blinked. I'd never been to the Pacific Northwest in my life. "Why Seattle?" I asked. His answer was measured, "Because the records we cross-checked show a possible genetic match tied to that address. That's all I can tell you over the phone. Please come." He gave me a name at the clinic who'd meet me if I arrived. The idea was ridiculous and irresistible. I tried to push it away. Work had bills and obligations. Elena would worry, she hated change. But the address burned in my pocket like a live coal. At the kitchen table that night I unfolded the slip and set it before her. She made tea, sat across from me in the lamplight, and for the first time in years I tried to force the words out of her. "Mom, why don't we have photos? Why don't you talk about him?" Her fingers tightened on the mug. She breathed a long, shallow breath and said, "Some doors, Lucas," and then stopped. I pressed. "Which doors?" She looked away. "The ones that, if opened, could let something dangerous in." Her voice was cracked and small. The sentence felt older than our conversation. I wanted to demand truth, but something in her expression, exhaustion, fear, a calculation, convinced me she wouldn't answer. So I booked a flight to Seattle with money scraped from my savings and a resolve that felt like a blade. I would open the door myself. The flight left me jittery and hollow in a way I didn't expect. Airports have a way of making problems smaller by distance, or worse, making them larger by removing the familiar. When the plane dipped toward the city, glass and rain and the bruise of cloud met me in the windows. I checked into a cheap room near Pike, slept badly, and wakeful with the sense I'd crossed into someone else's story. The address Dr. Singh had given me was a narrow brownstone on a quiet block near Capitol Hill, 128, Alder Street. The door looked ordinary and heavy, brass numbers slightly askew. I stood across the street for a long time, every step forward an argument with myself. What did I expect? To be met by a genealogist? A bureaucrat? A cruel prank? I knocked and the door swung open to a man whose face made my knees go weak. He dropped the mug he was holding, it shattered. He looked at me with the same eyes I'd seen in the mirror my whole life, the same brown, the same impatient crease near the brow. He whispered my name like he'd been rehearsing it for 25 years, Lucas. He said it again, this time barely audible, my son. The man was older than in the faded memory I'd constructed from the fragments of childhood, more lined, slower around the mouth, and when he reached for me his hands shook. I stood there in the hallway, the smell of coffee and old paper around us, the door open to a city that had grown up while I'd been taught to believe half my own life was a closed book. He told me his name was Mateo Crow. The words hit me like a wave, Mateo Crow. Alive. He said the fire had been real but not what I'd been told. He had not died. He had walked away, he said, and then corrected himself, he'd disappeared because staying would have killed us both. He said dangerous men, old debts, and a plan to keep us safe forced his hand. My stomach contracted into a hard knot. If he'd known he'd be alive for me to find, why didn't he write? Why not send a photo or leave a clue? He told me the truth would do more damage than his absence, that sometimes the lie of death keeps the ones you love hidden. His voice broke as he spoke. My mother had kept her own silence out of fear and loyalty. That night, in a cramped apartment smelling of stale coffee and orange peel soap, 25 years of silence began to untangle, thread by thread. He led me inside like a man carrying the weight of years, closing the door behind us as if the night itself might slip through the crack and undo whatever fragile piece we were about to try and build. Mateo's apartment looked like a map of a life lived in pieces, stacks of yellowed envelopes tied with twine, a battered map pinned to a corkboard, photographs with faces crossed out and dates scrawled beside them. It felt less like a home and more like a ledger of survival. He sat me down and reached for a tin of tea, his hands steady now with purpose. There are things you need to know in order, he said. But first, I want you to understand why I left. If you understand the why, you might understand the silence. He told it slow, every detail paired of drama, but the pieces themselves made a kind of quiet violence when they settled into place. Years ago, long before I was born, he had been involved, unwillingly, he insisted, with a group that trafficked in stolen artifacts and documents. Not the romanticized treasure chest kind of thieves, he said, but professional people who trafficked secrets, ledgers of bribery, lists of paid-off officials, recordings that could break careers. He stumbled onto one ledger, evidence, he called it, that tied a local syndicate to a string of arsons, a web of threats and payoffs that reached farther than he first thought. When he realized my mother and I could be targets, he chose to vanish. I burned what I could, he said, and his fingers trembled when he mimed the action. But some things can't be destroyed completely. People keep records. Names get traded. I thought going silent would keep you safe. I was wrong in some ways. I was right in others. He looked at me then in a way that made me feel young and exposed. I thought the danger would fade. It didn't. The paperwork he produced was a slow revelation. Old receipts with ledger codes. Photographs with people circled and penciled notes about times and faces. A grainy photocopy of a police report that had a line redacted so heavily it looked like a black stripe across a page. And, tucked neatly into a folder, a stack of letters he had written my mother and never sent, please folded into neat thirds, thinly veiled attempts at staying close without putting us in harm's way. I couldn't risk a letter that said I love you because someone else might read it and know where you were, he whispered. So I watched. From a distance. I did what I had to do. There was a softness to his anger when he spoke of Elena. He'd loved her, he said, in the small, steadfast ways that don't make movies but make mornings. But the world they lived in had no room for neat stories. He'd tried to make a life elsewhere, working odd jobs under assumed names, sleeping in places where no one would ask too many questions. He kept scrapbooks, receipts, hospital wristbands, the occasional Polaroid, proof he was alive for himself, not for anyone else. The last photograph he showed me, a Polaroid of a motel room with a note on the back, saw him at the market, couldn't go in. Made my chest ache. At some point I asked the question I'd been carrying for years, why my mother? Why hadn't he forced the truth? He closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead like a man trying to wrestle a memory into submission. Because telling her would have put her in the same room as the people I was trying to stop. She would have been dragged in whether she wanted to be or not. He said it like a fact, spare and final. I thought I could stop it if I disappeared. It was a terrible calculation. I thought I was buying you freedom. Maybe I was, in a way. We talked late into the night. The city outside hummed and the kettle cooled. Eventually he handed me a thin envelope with a strip of tape across a small, yellowing paper, a lab slip from the blood center, a reference number matched to his own file. When Dr. Singh called me, Mateo said, I knew. The clinic had been given access by an old contact at the blood center, someone who owed me for a favor I did long ago. He told them to look for a rare enzyme pattern, something I found in an old case that looks like a genetic signature. He thought if you showed up, it would be the right moment. He shrugged as if shrugging could explain fate. We spent the rest of the night sorting through the documents. At dawn, a shaky DNA test confirmed what the photograph had already said: Mateo was my father. The lab report used neutral, clinical language, but the numbers and markers it listed felt like a sudden, sharp proof that the missing piece of me had a name and an address. I stared at the report until the ink blurred, as if prolonged focus could etch it into my bones. But revelation doesn't untangle everything. Mateo's life was still a hazard map. He admitted there were people who remembered the ledger and, more worryingly, people who'd inherited the capacity for cruelty when threatened. You should know, he said, voice low, that this is not over. Once a ledger exists, someone will come looking for it. Sometimes they look in places you least expect. He looked at me like we were suddenly two accomplices in a plan that had begun years before either of us were ready. We decided, quietly and with little ceremony, that I would go home for a weekend. I needed to see Elena, to pry open the wound in the only way left, allowed. Mateo insisted on coming with me at first, then he changed his mind and said, no. You need to do this alone. She needs to choose to tell you. I didn't know whether he was right, but I couldn't argue. There is a different pressure when a child returns to ask questions of a parent. Adding a living father to that scene might have made it theater instead of truth. The drive back to Phoenix felt like moving through two lives at once, one in which I am a boy sitting at a kitchen table with a mother who keeps silence like a shield, the other in which I am 27, driving toward a confrontation I had long rehearsed and never found the courage to stage. Mateo's voice on the phone, when he called from Seattle at noon, was simple: she kept you safe. That's the truth before all the other truths. He added, softly, and if you need me, you call. When I pulled up to the apartment, Elena was waiting on the small stoop like an accused person waiting to learn her verdict. She looked older than she had on the day I left, gray at the temples, hands folded over a grocery bag. Her face collapsed when I opened the car door, the years of silence etching into something I could finally name: fear. We sat in the kitchen with the afternoon light slanting across the linoleum. I placed Mateo's DNA report and a photocopy of his passport on the table. Her hands shook. She didn't dodge. She told the whole story in a single, breathless exhale: Mateo's debts and threats, the nights she watched from the bedroom window as men she didn't recognize drove by in beat-up cars, the time someone left a slug on the doorstep, the quiet, desperate phone calls Mateo had made from distant payphones promising he would come back when it was safe. She covered her face and sobbed. I thought I was protecting you, she said. I thought if you never knew, you could live. I thought I was doing the right thing. There was anger in me that rose like bile. You let me grow up without a father, I said. You let me think he was dead. Elena's head snapped up. Her eyes were raw but resolute. I kept you alive, Lucas, she said. Do you hear me? I kept you safe. There is a kind of honesty that sits in the space after a long secrecy is finally voiced. The truth did not fix what was broken, but it rearranged the damage into a pattern I could see and begin to work with. I thought of Mateo's notebooks, of the ledger he hinted at, and of the way the world had conspired to make truth a dangerous commodity. We did not resolve everything in an afternoon. There are no tidy conclusions when a life has been built on omission. But I let Elena tell me the parts she had guarded, and for the first time in 25 years I saw the shape of what had happened. I forgave her not because the wound vanished but because I understood the calculus she had been forced to make. Forgiveness, in that moment, felt like a breath finally drawn after being underwater too long. That night I called Mateo. He answered on the second ring, and I told him everything. He listened, silent, and then, finally, come back, he said. We have more to do. There was the hint of urgency in his voice now, a small flare that made me aware of the ledger's shadows again. So I went back to Seattle, but not just to visit. Mateo and I began to talk about small, careful steps, copies of documents to trusted repositories, encrypted drives hidden in safety deposit boxes, the old contacts who owed favors and could be called in slowly. We were not heroes, we were two people trying to make the best choices in a mess made by other men's greed. The gratitude I felt toward Mateo was enormous and complicated, equal parts anger, relief, and a strange tenderness for the man who had chosen exile over exposure. The next morning in Seattle felt strangely calm, the kind of quiet that makes you uneasy because you know it won't last. Mateo had slept little, I could tell from the shadows under his eyes and the untouched mug of coffee on the table. Papers were spread across the desk, scanned files, coded notes, fragments of the ledger he had managed to smuggle out decades ago. It looked like the beginning of a storm, and we were standing at its center. "You've seen the broad strokes," he said, pulling a chair beside me. "But this next part, it's where things get dangerous again." He slid a manila folder toward me. It was heavier than I expected. Inside were photocopies of ledger pages, lists of transactions, dates stretching back 28 years, and columns of names, some scratched out, some circled, a few highlighted in red ink. One name appeared again and again, Rothman. "Who is this?" I asked. Mateo exhaled. "The man who controlled everything. Back then, he was a middle-tier fixer, someone who moved money around for people who couldn't afford to leave fingerprints. But over the years, he grew. Became powerful. Dangerous. A man whose business thrives in the dark." "And you exposed him?" I asked. Mateo shook his head. "Not fully. I got hold of the ledger he kept hidden in case he ever needed leverage. I didn't steal it for money. I stole it because he tried to burn down our house while you and your mother slept." My chest tightened. "The fire." "Yes," he said quietly. "He sent men to scare me. When I wouldn't play along, the threats escalated. And when the fire didn't kill us, he realized eliminating me wouldn't be enough. He would use you and your mother to punish me. So I disappeared." I stared at the pages, the numbers blurring. "Why now?" I asked. "Why bring all this up again?" "Because someone is asking about you," he said, lowering his voice. "And not in the way normal people do. A man visited the blood center before they contacted you. Asked for donor lists. Pressed about unusual genetic markers. He was looking for you before the results even came in." Chills ran up my spine. How would he know who I was? Mateo opened another folder. Inside were photographs, grainy zoomed-in shots of me leaving work, unlocking the apartment door, walking with groceries. My stomach lurched. These weren't random snapshots. Someone had been following me long before I donated blood. "They wanted to know if you were alive," Mateo said. "Whether you were the son of the man who betrayed Rothman. They never had confirmation, until your blood record matched mine. That's why I had to call the clinic. I needed to get to you first. It was too much." My breathing quickened. "So what happens now? Do we run? Do we hide?" He shook his head. "Running is what I've done for decades. You deserve a life without looking over your shoulder. That means we end this. We bring the ledger to someone who can actually act on it." I frowned. "Like the police?" He laughed, but the sound held no humor. "If the police could fix this, I would have gone to them years ago. No, this requires someone outside the system. Someone who can handle a man like Rothman." "Who?" I demanded. Mateo hesitated, then pulled out another envelope. Inside was a business card, black with silver lettering, no name, no title. Just a phone number and one word stamped across the center. "Aurelius." "Who is this?" I asked. "Not a who," Mateo said. "A network. A group dedicated to dismantling people like Rothman. They don't operate within the law, but they don't break it either. They move in the gray. And they never do anything without a purpose." I stared at the card, feeling its weight. It felt colder than paper should be. Mateo continued, "I didn't contact them before because they require proof, not stories. They require the ledger." He tapped the folder. "But once we show it to them, there's no turning back." A slow dread crept into my stomach. What do they expect from us? His eyes hardened. "They expect truth. And courage. And maybe risk." I sat back, rubbing my temples. "I'm a mechanic," I said. "I fix broken engines, not criminal networks or syndicates." "You're more than that," he said. "You've been surviving lies your whole life without knowing it. And now you have a chance to make them stop." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting instantly from calm to alert. "They found us," he whispered. My pulse spiked. "What?" He held the phone up. The screen displayed a single text message from an unknown number. "Nice talk last night. He looks just like you." My throat closed. He grabbed my arm. "We're not staying here. Get your bag. Now." We shoved the documents into a backpack, grabbed jackets, swept the counter of anything identifiable. Mateo moved with the precision of a man who had rehearsed this escape for years. I followed him out the back exit, adrenaline burning through my veins. The cold Seattle air hit my face like a slap. Mateo scanned the alley, then pulled me toward the car. A noise cracked through the quiet, a car door slamming somewhere behind us. Mateo stiffened. "Lucas," he whispered, "don't turn around. Just get in. But instinct, fear, something primal in my chest made me look anyway. A black SUV idled at the end of the alley. 2 men stepped out. Both wearing dark coats. Both watching us. My pulse roared in my ears. Dad, I breathed. Mateo's hand closed around my shoulder, his grip iron. Get in the car now. We dove inside, doors slamming shut as Mateo jammed the keys into the ignition. The SUV's headlights flared to life behind us. The engine roared. Mateo hit the gas. The alley blurred. The SUV followed. We burst onto the street as horns blared, tires screeching on wet pavement. Seattle traffic splintered around us as Mateo swerved through lanes with practiced precision. Where are we going? I shouted. A safe place, he said. Aurelius has a contact here. But we have to lose them first. The SUV accelerated. Closer. Closer. My heart hammered so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Finally, after a sharp turn down a narrow road lined with storage warehouses, Mateo slammed the brakes and cut the engine. The car skidded to a stop behind a rusted metal container. He pressed a finger to my lips, motioning for silence. The SUV roared past the intersection moments later. We didn't breathe until the sound faded. Only then did Mateo speak. We contact Aurelius tonight, he said. Before Rothman's people find us again. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a silver satellite phone. Everything changes now, Lucas. Outside, the city felt suddenly too quiet. Too still. As if holding its breath for what came next. Mateo dialed the number on the silver satellite phone, his fingers steady despite everything we had just escaped. I held my breath as the device beeped 3 times before a click echoed faintly through the speaker. A voice, calm, smooth, impossible to read, answered. State your purpose. Mateo straightened. This is Mateo Vargo. I'm activating an Aurelius contact request. Level 3 priority. A pause. Then, verification code? He spoke a series of numbers and letters so quickly I couldn't process them, a string of sequences that sounded like coordinates mixed with cipher keys. Another pause. Then the voice returned, slightly warmer. It's been a long time, Mateo. We wondered when you would resurface. Didn't have a choice, Mateo said. Rothman's people made the first move. And I'm not alone anymore. My son is with me. And the ledger? Fully intact. Every page. A slow exhale came through the speaker, one that sounded like satisfaction. Good. Bring it to the haven. Mateo tensed. That's still active? For people like you, the voice replied, it never closed. The line went dead. Before I could ask anything, the phone buzzed with a text showing a single address, an abandoned textile factory on the edge of the industrial district. I stared at the screen. We're really going there? Mateo nodded. It's the only place left where Rothman won't reach first. We drove in silence through the sleeping city, the neon reflections rippling across the wet streets. The rain returned, gentle at first, then heavier. I watched droplets race down the window, feeling like the world outside was dissolving into static. Dad, I said finally, breaking the quiet. When this is over, what happens to us? He kept his eyes on the road. When this is over, you'll finally be free. That's all I want. But you? I whispered. He didn't answer. The factory loomed ahead, massive, steel-framed, abandoned for decades. But the moment we stepped inside, the illusion shattered. Hidden lights glowed behind concrete columns. Figures moved in the shadows. A door slid open automatically as we approached. 2 people waited for us, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter, sharper, with silver-streaked hair tied at the back. They wore no uniforms, but everything about them, posture, precision, presence, felt like controlled threat. Mateo Vargo, the woman said, stepping forward. You finally brought the ledger. She looked at me then, her eyes scanning my face, reading my fear, my questions, the exhaustion etched into my bones. And this is your son, she said. We've been expecting him. My pulse quickened. Expecting me? Why? The tall man answered. Because Rothman was expecting you. You don't survive men like him without knowing everything he watches. You were a missing piece in his puzzle, one that suddenly appeared. Mateo pulled the backpack off his shoulder and handed it to the woman. She opened it carefully, revealing the faded ledger, its pages yellowed and fragile. She ran a gloved hand over it. You do realize what you're handing over, Mateo? This book could dismantle everything Rothman built in 30 years. That's the point, he said. And you understand what he'll do when he realizes you gave it away? Mateo's eyes hardened. He already wants me dead. This changes nothing except the odds. The woman closed the bag. Then let's adjust the odds. She motioned for us to follow her deeper into the compound. The room we entered next looked nothing like a factory. It was a command center, walls of monitors, maps with digital markers, encrypted communication lines, a dozen analysts watching tracked cars and shifting coordinates. This, she said, is Haven. Not a safe house. A battlefield where truth and strategy meet. A man at a console called out, "We have movement." Rothman's SUV picked up by traffic cameras 3 blocks from Vargo's apartment. They know he's gone. The woman turned to us. "You brought trouble here. But you also brought the only ammunition we need." I felt the weight of every step we had taken. What happens now? Mateo's hand rested briefly on my shoulder, grounding me. Now they expose Rothman for good. The silver-haired woman nodded and lifted the ledger. In 72 hours, this will be in the hands of agencies who cannot be bought. FBI divisions outside his influence. International partners. Financial watchdogs. Once it's out, he's finished. And until then? I asked. The tall man answered bluntly, "You disappear." My stomach sank. Disappear? For a short time, the woman said. New identities, temporary relocation. You'll be protected. When the dust clears, you can build a real life. A real life. The phrase hit me harder than I expected. A life without lies. Without running. Without silence. Mateo turned to me. "Lucas, I know this is overwhelming. But it's the only way you'll ever have peace. The only way we would ever have peace." I nodded slowly. "Okay. We'll do it." Relief flickered across his face, but only for a moment. Because the next instant, alarms blared through the compound. A voice shouted from a console, "Security breach. East entrance. They're here, 3 hostiles, armed." My blood turned to ice. The lights flashed red. Chaos erupted. Analysts scattered. Guards sprinted toward corridors. The tall man drew a weapon from his holster. The woman cursed under her breath and shoved the ledger into a steel case. Mateo grabbed my wrist. "Stay behind me." Before I could react, gunshots cracked through the air, sharp, deafening, impossibly close. The concrete wall beside us splintered. "They found Haven," the tall man shouted. "How the hell did they find Haven?" We ducked behind a reinforced pillar. Mateo scanned the path ahead. "We can't stay here. Lucas, when I say run, you run." I felt my heart slamming against my ribs. "But where?" "Don't argue," he snapped. "I lost you once. I'm not losing you again." Footsteps thundered down the hallway, 3 men in dark coats, moving with military precision. One carried a suppressed rifle. Rothman's men. I felt myself freeze, every instinct telling me to hide, to vanish, to disappear into the concrete. Then Mateo squeezed my hand. "Lucas," he whispered. "Look at me." I forced myself to meet his eyes, eyes that mirrored mine, the same shape, the same depth. "You are not a mistake," he said. "You are not a ghost. You are my son. Everything I've done, every sacrifice, was to bring you to a moment where you could choose your own life." My throat tightened. He pressed something into my palm, a small flash drive. "What's on this?" I whispered. "Backup of the ledger. If they take me, you run to Aurelius. You finish what I started." Before I could argue, the silver-haired woman shouted from across the room, "Vargo. Move!" The hostiles rounded the corner. Mateo shoved me backward. Gunfire exploded. Shouts echoed. Bodies collided. I stumbled behind a steel partition as chaos erupted, flashes of muzzle light illuminating the dark, shadows flinging across walls. The tall Aurelius operative tackled one of Rothman's men. Another gunshot rang out. A scream. My heart pounded as I crawled low, searching desperately for Mateo. And then I saw him. Pinned behind a console, returning fire, protecting an analyst who was trying to escape. He looked at me once, just once. And mouthed. "Run." I forced myself to move. Forced myself toward the back exit where the woman had indicated emergency transport waited. Around me, alarms blared, bullets ricocheted, shouts collided in a storm of violence. I sprinted down the hall, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. As I reached the exit ladder, I heard Mateo's voice, one last shout. "Go!" I climbed. Burst into the cold night air. And didn't look back. The helicopter that whisked me away lifted off just as Haven's entrance erupted in fire below. The world shrank into lights and smoke as Seattle fell away beneath us. The woman sat across from me in the chopper, her face streaked with sweat. "We'll find him," she said, though fear lingered in her voice. "Mateo is too valuable for Rothman to kill. He'll bargain first." I clutched the flash drive tighter. "Whatever happens," she said, "your father chose to fight. Now you choose what comes next." Outside, the horizon glowed faintly as dawn approached. Somewhere below, my father fought to protect the truth. And I, finally, held the power he had carried alone for decades. The silence of my childhood had been broken. But the war for truth had only just begun. If this final part moved you, please like, share, and comment which moment hit you the hardest. And if you want more powerful, emotional stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps me keep bringing these stories to life.